Okay.
Parshat Ki Teitzei. Ki Teitzei is a parsha that is well known among the rest of the Torah portions. Anybody want to know? Anybody know why this parsha has a kind of a singular uh, um, uh, element to it that makes it stand out from the rest of the Torah portions? It is the Torah portion with the most mitzvot enumerated in it.
Right.
613 mitzvot cataloged over the course of the entire Torah. And all the various certain Torah portions have none, certain Torah portions have one, certain Torah portions have many. And this Torah portion has the most. Now, there's a discussion as to how many in 80, 70, whatever it is, but depending on how you calculate the mitzvot, but a lot. A significant amount of the mitzvot are in this Torah portion. Almost every verse is another mitzvah. It's really just like, in a sense, it almost it feels like Moshe's doing housekeeping, right? Or God's doing housekeeping. It's like, okay, let's go. We got to cover all these mitzvot. So here's what you got to do in this situation. Here's what you got to do in this situation. Here's what you got to do in this situation. Just starts really listing and bouncing from topic to topic. And obviously, I'll talk about 2 points, I think, that one leads into the other. The first one is at the end of the first aliyah, you have this bizarre situation and discussion about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, right? The Ben Sorer Umoreh is the rebellious son, rebellious child. And this child, why do I say bizarre? It's bizarre, first of all, because of the behavior of such a child. And what's even more bizarre is the fact that this child gets dragged to the court to be put into a capital trial, where if he's found guilty, he'll be put to death by his own parents. His parents are the ones that are meant to drag him to the court and to put him on trial. Now, the Gemara has a very fascinating discussion, which is when the Torah talks about whatever it talks about on subjects, are these imperatives? Are these things that for sure occurred, or sure will occur, etc.? And the Torah says no. The Torah can engage in the theoretical, and the proof of it is this case of the Ben Sorer Umoreh, because this case never actually occurred in history. That is what the Talmud says, that the case of this rebellious son never occurred in history, because the Talmud goes on to describe all the requirements that are necessary for a child to be considered to be deemed the Ben Sorer Umoreh, this rebellious son. He has to go steal. He has to go steal from his parents. He has to steal from his parents with their money is in a certain place. He has to then go buy meat and wine. He has to take from that meat and wine. He has to eat a certain amount of it raw. I mean,
Rabbi, can you mute us, please? Because somebody has background noise.
Yes.
Oops, it's me. I'm sorry. I'm going to mute me.
No problem. So the bottom line is that the cases of the Ben Sorer, the case of Ben Sorer Umoreh is so unique and almost so fantastical that it never actually occurred and never will occur. And yet the Torah shares that it's not a waste of space, because the Torah is not, and this is important, the Torah is not a law book. Because if the Torah was a law book, and from God, i.e. the perfect law book, then if there's a law that never will actually occur, then what's the point of stating it? There wouldn't be a reason to tell us about a law if the law is something that would never actually come into fruition. It's a waste of space, a waste of ink, and God doesn't waste anything. Rather, the Torah is an instruction manual. And law and instruction are 2 very different things. Law is, in this scenario, this is the law. And if it's a different scenario, then this law is irrelevant. An instruction manual is that here is life guidance. And if your case may not be this exact case, but there are elements and echoes of this, then there's what you can learn from here. And in the case of the Ben Sorer or More, this is the extreme end of a path. And while God, thank God, nobody has actually ever gone all the way down that path, but the way that the Torah instructs us to handle the Sorah Marah and who bears the responsibility, etc., teaches us a very important message, whether it is about the Sorah or Morah or not, or just in general, even with a good child. What are some of the lessons we learn about the Ben Sorah and Morah? Number one, we call this individual who has gone so far off the deep end that it is considered a mercy to end this person's life so he doesn't stain his soul any further. Because in Judaism, we believe that this world is not the only world. There's a world to come, and that's an everlasting world. And good or bad that you do in this world will have a lasting, almost everlasting repercussions on your soul. And so that in this case, the reason that the Ben Sorah Mara is taken by his own parents is not simply because the just society must trump even one's own love for their child. That's not what we're saying here. It's actually the love that you have for your child that's going to have you bring him to Beit Din, because this, again, this extreme case, a case that actually never ended up playing out because it's so extreme, but it could be a case where this person has gone so far down the rabbit hole that the best thing we can do for this person is end their life before they can do any further damage to their soul, and therefore give them a chance to rehabilitate their soul in heaven, and then experience a heaven with a certain amount of bliss, rather than, God forbid, the opposite. That is the concept of the Sorah Moreh. But more importantly, what we get from here is, and the fact, what do we call this? We don't call this a rebellious person. What do we call this person? We call this person a rebellious child. In other words, the parents, we as parents have to feel, as kind of the conversation we were having a little bit before, a certain amount of responsibility for our child, good, bad, etc. And even in this case, where this child has gone so far beyond the pale, the parent still feels the role and the responsibility to even make this incredibly, nearly impossible decision. That is ultimately very difficult in the moment, ultimately beneficial for this particular child. But we call this child the Ben Sorer, which speaks to the fact that a parent is never, in a sense, fully can wash their hands. When God deems to put a certain soul under your jurisdiction, under your care, be born through you, then that soul is always intrinsically linked to you. And a parent has to feel that responsibility. So again, whether what we can learn from the Ben Sorah Morah, whether it is whether this case ever actually took place, or whether we're not even talking about a bad child, we're talking about a good child. But the Ben Sorah Morah teaches us an idea about the general sense of responsibility that a parent should feels for not just their child's behavior, but for the eternal soul of that child, and making decisions with that in mind. And so in today's society, for example, there's a lot of the idea that, as a good parent, I'm going to allow my child, I'm not going to really mix into my child's life. I'm going to let the child make their own decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here where it said that no, the Jewish message is hands-on parenting. Not just because it's the nice thing to do, but it's because it's your responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that, and this is another message, that even with the hands-on parenting, that you're about no guarantees about how the child will turn out, because at the end of the day, that's where free will kicks in, and everybody's granted free will. Nobody's an automaton. And if the case was always that parents had full influence over their children, then those born to parents that were less than perfect or worse parents, that's an unfair lot in life versus the children that are born to better parents. If you're saying that to a certain degree, automatically there is going to be that correlation, then the truth is that God, then you're picking winners and losers, as it were. by having this child born into this family. So at the end of the day, the responsibility of who you are is primarily your responsibility. However, we understand that society, nobody is born, even when Adam Harishon was born or was created. What did God took one good look at him and said, "Lo tov heyot Adam levado." It's not good for a person to be alone. A person cannot develop. Nobody develops into who they are purely on their own, purely unilaterally. No man in islands, right? Rather, every single one of us is very much influenced, and that's the second part of the discussion about the Ben Sorum. Or it's not just the parents that bear the responsibility, but rather that child then gets brought before Bet Din, and the Bet Din has to mete out the consequence. And it says in order that everybody should see and fear. In other words, and take note, because this is also a society. The society has to also feel a certain sense of responsibility for this child and the way that this child turned out, or the way the child should turn out. We as a society, if we know that there is a circumstance where a child can benefit from an institution, right, a school or whatever it is, and we say, yes, but it's not my problem. They can pay the tuition, then we'll put them in the school. They can't pay the tuition, then we won't have them in the school, right? Not my problem. No, yes, it is your problem. If you are at the helm of a certain resource, then you have to feel a certain sense, a responsibility as a member of the community, that to see what you can do to make that resource available to those that need it, and this child, etc. Doesn't mean you have to give free tuition, because if you do that, then you're not going to have the wherewithal to put forward a good product and something that is in fact a resource. So you have responsibility to your efforts and to your enterprise, but at the same time, you can't then have an approach, and in a sense, a purely capitalistic approach, which says if you can pay, you get the benefit from my product. If you can't pay, then that's just the way it is. Yiddishkeit sees the responsibility of raising good human beings as a responsibility of a parent and as a responsibility of society. And that's what we can learn from the Ben Sorer or Mora, even if the event never actually occurred. So this is in general about Yiddishkeit, that whether something whether you're reading a certain mitzvah in the Torah or a certain mitzvah in the Parsha, and you're like, wait a minute, this is not relevant to me because the scenario has never and will never occur in my life. So I can skip this section of the Torah because it's a law, and this law doesn't apply to me, and so ergo I don't have to read it. I am not picking up the law books of Mumbai, India. Okay? I have other things to do with my time, and the reason is because I never expect to live in Mumbai, India, and so the laws that apply to Mumbai, India are not relevant to me. One cannot say that about any line in the Torah, because the Torah is an instruction manual to you, for you. And even if this particular scenario you think the practical scenario will not actually occur, then what is incumbent upon you, it says, okay, so how is this still an instruction in my life? And let's give another example, another very fascinating quote in this week's parsha. And it says, "Ki tivne bayit," when you will build a home, v'asita ma'akel gagecha, you have to make a fence around the roof. Why? So v'lo tamim damim b'veitecha, so no blood will you will not place any blood in your house. Ki yipol hanofel mimena, when the faller will fall from it. Okay, here's the basic understanding of the mitzvah. If you buy a house and it has a flat, or you build a house and it has a flat roof, that's a hazard. That flat roof is a hazard because a flat roof is meant to be used. It's not. It's going to be. There's going to be traffic up there on that roof. You have a responsibility that when you create a hazard, to protect against potential consequences of those hazards. And there's a lot in this week's parsha about that. If you dig a pit, you have to cover the pit, yada yada yada. But there's a couple things that one has to, in a sense, reinvestigate about this particular segment, about the fence on the roof. Number one, what happens if I'm never? How would this be relevant to me if I am never going to buy a house with a flat roof? Happens to be that here we do. The Chabad house has a flat roof, right? Still, we happen to not use the flat roof for any traffic, right? There isn't it's not like back in the day. You go into Israel, even today in Israel, people use their flat roofs for everything. But back then, especially, people use the weather over there being what it is in the Mediterranean. It's usually dry and usually pleasant, and the roof is used to dry things on, or for people to sit and talk. So they have a flat roof. But for the say again.
In California also.
Yeah. Makes sense when you live in those kind of climates. But here in the wet and mercurial east, where the weather changes a lot and it rains a lot, it makes more sense to have a sloped roof. So if I'm looking at this, like, oh, okay, I don't own a house with a flat roof, so this section really doesn't talk to me. So the question is, you have to ask yourself, how does it still talk to you? How is it still relevant to you if you're not going to own a house with a flat roof? Second of all, it uses a strange expression. It says, when the faller will fall. Wait a minute. If he hasn't fallen yet, he's not a faller. Right? When the person will fall, then that person has become a faller.
Maybe he had fallen spirit in his soul. Maybe he fell.
So Paula, now you're
again.
Yeah, now you're going the deeper level we're going to come to in a moment.
Okay.
In a practical sense, so right, Paula is saying that we're talking something about more spiritual. Good. Hold that thought. We're coming back to it. The practical Talmudic answer is, why is this person called a faller? And that the Talmud is saying, because when you created a flat roof and didn't put on a fence, then you have already designated somebody to eventually be a faller. In other words, almost like if it's the potential for it, it's almost inevitable. So that calling this person a faller is speaking to the inevitability of the fact that you've created a hazard and are not protecting against it. There's somebody that's going to be a faller already. And that's why, in a sense, you have to feel the responsibility. And because you can say, look, it's my house, I'm careful about it. If this schnook wanted to go on and not be careful, that's not my problem. That's his problem. No, the answer is, you're the one who created this hazard, and it has a certain an inevitability factor to it. We're going to call this person a faller already. This person is already kind of, the laws of probabilities have already designated this person as a faller, not this particular person, but some other person going on your roof, whatever it is. And so when that person falls, that will be your responsibility.
Rabbi, does this speak to doing things in general that put other people in danger?
Absolutely.
Isn't there something about not putting a stumbling block before a blind person? And
correct. Right. And we talked about this also as if you dig a pit. But the bottom line is, a person has to be cognizant. And here's not even in a public domain. It's a private domain. It's not like I've created a public hazard. Right? This is basically saying, for example, if you have and this is this right now is in terms of just keeping, it's really a fascinating legal discussion. If I have a hazard on my private property, right, am I responsible for damages that occur because of it? It's my private property. Enter at your own risk, right? Quite literally, right? And it's a point. It's a continuous discussion, right? This stuff crops up all the time in the public sphere in discussions. They had a story of a burglar who climbed onto the roof of a house to gain access, and he fell through the roof. The roof was not in good repair. Broke his leg. Sued the family for damages because the roof was not in good repair.
You have to make it safe for burglars. What's wrong with you?
Exactly. And the answer is that he actually won the case.
That was Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly right. That family, right, has now been traumatized. All the kids are not looking for Santa Claus coming. They're like, they've been traumatized for life from the idea of somebody coming through their roof. Either way, the point is that itself is a very fascinating discussion, and the Talmud would seem, or the Torah would seem to indicate that you bear a responsibility for hazards that you create or hazards that you own and do not remediate, even if it is your private property. So it's own very fascinating discussion, and it's worth spending time with that in and of itself in a Torah legal class. But to touch on a different point, because what happens, so that's something that you can learn from this point, whether you have a sloped roof or if you lean a ladder against your house, right? And a sloped roof, and some kid climbs up that ladder and falls. And if from a Jewish perspective, you are responsible. You created a hazard. You never asked this kid to go up, you never indicated you don't want the kid going up on the ladder, but it doesn't really make a difference. You've created a hazard, an unnecessary hazard, without the adequate protections against it. Now, there's a difference if you put up a ladder and you set up the ladder, and then you climbed up the ladder because you know you have to do something on the roof, and literally in that split moment, the kid came by, whatever it is. Like, you have to be, obviously we measure everything with a certain amount of logic and feasibility, right? We're not talking about, but in the case where you left that ladder, you just leave that ladder for weeks or whatever it is, then eventually we can say the inevitability of something like that happening is far more significant, right? And so the Talmud provides all these various measures of when you consider something such a remote chance that somebody's actually going to become damaged by this versus if it's more regular, right? And that's where the term ki yipol hanofel, if this is a case where it's almost inevitable, we can already call this guy a faller, right? That would be the case where you would be responsible versus something that would be incredibly remote, then you wouldn't be. Own conversation. But let's turn now, in the last few minutes, to Paula's approach on this. Kitivna bayit, when you will build a home. It doesn't say kitivnu, when you will plural build a home. It talks about you as an individual build a home. And that, the Torah uses that. What do we call a person who settles down in life? In Hebrew, we call him a bal habayit, right? And we call the Rebbetzin a balat bayit, or if you're Yiddish, you say a balabasta, right? A balabasta, right? A balabas and a balabasta, right? And that means whether you rent an apartment or you're living on the street, it doesn't make a difference. It's not generally a reference to the actual physical piece of real estate that you own. Rather, it's a general statement about where you are in life. You have settled down and you're, in a sense, establishing your domain. Kitivna bayit, as you are building your domain, you're settling down and you're becoming who you are. Vasita ma'akel legagecha, you can make a fence around your roof. You are meant to live in this world. Each one of us are meant to live in this world. That means our hands, our feet, even to a certain degree, our heart is engaged and involved in the world around us. We're meant to be part of people in this world. We're not meant to be monks on a hill. We're not meant to be angels in heaven. We're meant to be individuals in this world. That's what God wants from us. But you need to do so with a healthy sense of what you are here to do and the hazards that are potentially exist against you achieving what you need to do. And one of those things is how do you make sure that as you are treading upon this land, that this land doesn't become quicksand to you, doesn't suck you in and drown you in its worldliness. And the answer to that is Vasita ma'akel legagecha. You have to make a fence around your roof. Your head stays separate and apart, and eye always on the prize. You have to be within, but stay above. You need to be in this world. You need to be engaged, but you can't drown in this world. And as long as your head stays above the water, as long as you protect your head, you keep your head fenced, then you will be okay. Because if you don't, then the faller, which is you, will fall. It is inevitable. You can't say, you know what, I can get involved head, shoulders, everything into this world, and I won't be affected. No. The faller will fall. You have to protect against it. You need to practice defensive spirituality. The world is not a place in which godliness is shining from every corner, which means it's a work in progress. The world is a construction zone, and you need to wear your hard hat. You don't stay out of the construction zone. You engage in the construction zone. You're one of the construction workers. You're meant to be in this world. You're meant to be engaged. You're meant to be fixing and building and digging and all those things. But you have to realize you're in a dangerous zone. And you need to put a fence around your roof. And we have the model for this from the very first person that gets called Yisrael. Israel himself, Yaakov Avinu, when he left, right, the yeshiva where he was studying, the Ohel, he was studying with Yosef Ohel, right? He was sitting, and he was on his way into the world to become a Bal Habas, right? He was going to become a Bal Habayit, right? He was heading to Haran. He laid down at night in the wilderness, and what did he do? He took a whole bunch of rocks, and he surrounded his
Head.
From all the wild animals. It doesn't say he surrounded his body. Now, if he was physically concerned about wild animals, pretty sure there's a lot of vital organs other than your head that you need to protect, right? If you're going to say, yeah, my head's going to be protected, but I'm going to leave the rest of myself exposed, everything should be great, right? That's not good camping advice, right? You're not going to get your survivalist badge with that kind of approach. But he wasn't concerned about the physical wild animals. He was concerned on the spiritual level. He knew he cannot surround his body totally and fence his whole body off, because then what's the point of him going into the world if he's not going to exist in the world? He's going to the world to engage the world, to elevate the world, to refine the world. He has a purpose there. But Yaakov Avinu fulfilled this command. Vasita ma'akeh legagecha. He created a fence around his head, so that no matter how deep into the world he got, a part of him always kept his eye on the prize. And that's why he was able to say, Im lavan garti v'tayag mitzvot shamarti. I did live with the most corrupt individual on the planet, but I still managed to stay Yaakov Avinu and keep the 613 mitzvot, because my head I never compromised on. And I kept that fence around my head. And this is a very important message, and for each and every one of us. This is so important. This is so crucial. Whether you have a sloped roofed house or a house at all, or living on the streets, this message about putting a fence on your roof is so key, and in a very practical sense. You need to start your day.
I'm engaged in a current argument with a friend of mine about this topic. Every day there's more. It's not that we're arguing, but I mean, she's.
But here it is. Show this to her. Very
idea of shutting down and only reading Torah and I'm like, you have to be in, you know what I mean? And so we're going back and forth. It's not that we disagree with each other. It's just that this issue comes up a lot.
Yes. Now, certain people, everybody's going to be on a sliding scale of involvement in this world. Certain people are expected to be more involved. Certain people, their involvement in this world is just eating meals or whatever it is, but they're meant to be yeshiva students or whatever it is. Everybody has their thing. I'm not going to use this to define particulars. In other words, I'm not going to use this and just say there's a one size fits all message here. But the message is something that everybody can draw from, which is that no matter the level of your involvement in this world, you need to make sure there's a part of you that is consecrated, that is sectioned off. Otherwise, you will be a faller. Why will you be a faller? Because you're unanchored. You're unanchored, and you are not individually more powerful than the streams of the entire world. The entire world will pull you down. You are automatically a faller unless you are anchored. And so that is what the parsha is saying. So every person has to figure out what is their anchor, and their anchor has to be firmly fixed and unmoving. It could be a daily the chakras. I don't start my day without davening chakras and putting on my talis and tefillin. I don't start my day without having a Torah class, or I don't end my day without a Torah class, or whatever it is. What is your anchor? What is, and it could be more than one. But how is it that you have definitively placed a fence around your gag so that you are not in Othel, so you don't fall? All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Tell your father we're thinking of him.
Thank you. The learning here done. Merit of a speedy recovery from Baruch Hashem, not too significant of a procedure, but of Harav Ben Zion Ben Rivka Dina. And,
Amen.
Amen.
and we should all have the best of health, and most importantly, we should all see each other in Yerushalayim with Mashiach.
Of course.
Thank you.
Now.
Amen. Shabbat
I'm
shalom.
here. I'm here.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom, everybody. All the best to you,
Shabbos.
Dad. Bye-bye.
Bye.